Hello, my name's Lisa, and I wanted only good for everybody, but I received only a wave of indignation and a fine from the police, and all that because of my habit of spying on the neighbors. As a kid, I had an amazing ability to remember any information. At school, I shocked teachers that I could literally repeat what was written on the page after the first reading. As you can guess, I never had any problems with lessons. Any information would settle in my head forever. They even took me to doctors because my parents were afraid that this was some kind of anomaly. But no, our family doctor said that I was fine, only advised us to actively train my memory and develop my talent. And my parents better do something, like the prevention from all kinds of memory diseases. He hinted so because my mom again missed her own appointment, and Dad didn't visit the hospital for about 5 years. The only drawback was that I always had little information. Any information, any quality. I read tons of books, textbooks, all available materials on any topics interesting to me, and suddenly I found the most intense curiosity. So I discovered a new hobby for myself, spying on everyone who's close by. It was important for me to know everything that was happening around me, even if people were carefully hiding something from me, especially if they were hiding something. My curious face stuck out of every window in the house, every bush in the neighborhood. And when my dad gave me binoculars for my 12th birthday, my neighbors lost their private life entirely. No, I never blackmailed people with what I found out. Just collected the gossip and carefully outlined them in my head, and then tracked through the windows and yards of other people, whether it was truth or fiction. At the same time, my curiosity didn't harm those who it was aimed at. I wasn't going to engage in blackmail or something like that, just collecting secrets. If you also love spying on other people, write in the comments about the strangest places where you followed other people. I once hung on the ledge of someone's roof, and I was very afraid of falling and turning my neck, or missing at least one word. For me, it was about the same. My friends, by the way, really appreciated me. They could always tell me any secret, and all this remained with me. I was the most reliable keeper of other people's secrets. Just the very thought that I knew something that others don't even guess about pleased my soul. My especially favorite neighbors were located opposite of my house. Something interesting always happened to them, such as theme parties or board game sessions. And they didn't have curtains at all, because it was believed that the distance to the nearest house was big enough. But you remember about the binoculars, right? But my favorite thing was their movie nights. The neighbors used a projector with a huge sheet. Everything was visible even without the binoculars. And with them, the picture was just as cool as possible. My parents forbade me to watch films after 11 p.m., besides such films. I mean, for adults. And here, I saw the classics. Modern action movies, quite bloody, and even horror. It seems to me that I became a real movie fan and a connoisseur. In addition, these films satisfied my curiosity a little. Not much, of course, but such illegal peeping that you aren't punished for. Then, thanks to these same neighbors, another love came to my life: detectives. All sorts of invented and very complicated stories excited my imagination and scratched my brains. True, the first drawback of my perfect memory was immediately discovered. I memorized everything I read and could no longer re-enjoy my favorite stories. I just had to buy tons of new detective stories, and not all of them were Agatha Christie level. Mom even had to get me a card to the city library because buying books all the time was completely ruining my budget. But I had a new friend, our elderly, lonely librarian, who not only helped me choose some cool stories, but also willingly discussed them, because she read almost everything that was in the common rooms. I spent all my free time in the reading room, or in my room behind a book. But sooner or later, all good things come to an end, and the books began to slowly run out. In order not to lose my pleasure completely, I agreed with myself on the limit of 1 book per week, no more, and returned to my terrible hobby. During my absence, nothing has changed in general. The young couple across the street still spend evenings in the backyard gazebo with wine and a warm blanket. The elderly grandfather and his Cocker Spaniel left the house at exactly 10:20 p.m. and went for a walk. And the neighboring guys just ran away from the house closer to midnight through the window and went to hang out until dawn. But I also had favorites who never disappointed me. Remember the neighbors that started it all? Here, I return to them again and again. They always had something interesting. That evening, as usual, I settled on my windowsill with binoculars in my hands. According to the schedule, which the neighbors never broke, then they should have just been having an evening of cinema, and I was already looking forward to a session of something beautiful and forbidden, for which my strict mom would punish me. But a tough, just the most terrible disappointment was waiting for me. Usually at this time, the neighbors were already pulling the screen on the wall, and now there wasn't even a light in the house, as if all disappeared somewhere and forgot to warn me. I knew for sure that on Friday they had a movie, and that they weren't going anywhere. Then there would be some suitcases or something like that, but there was nothing. This was my first surveillance disappointment. Like, I'm not so good, since I missed someone else's journey. It was a shame, yeah. And then it also became scary. I then thought for the first time that spying on neighbors wasn't such a nice habit, because what I saw had only one explanation. I witnessed a murder. Well, or it just seemed to me. And the thing is that a neighbor suddenly appeared in my zone of visibility. One. In some strange black overalls, a hat on his head, and with a plastic bag in his hands. So, as suspicious as possible. Black and so much like a classic bag for transporting corpses. Here, by the way, I suddenly remembered that no one had seen my neighbor's wife for 3 days. Probably. Nobody, including me. But earlier, for some reason, it seemed to me this wasn't important. On weekdays, in that house nothing happened. So my surveillance wasn't focused on this house. Well, and somehow, the moment with someone else's loss passed me by. Yeah. Fairly, I'll say it was hard to look. The neighbor didn't turn on the lights, or at least take a flashlight. And there was no night vision on my binoculars. So, I just didn't see anything in the dark. But remember, right? Detectives, spies, hunting for a maniac. Here in my head there was a picture, amazing in its bloodiness. Naturally, as a conscious citizen, I immediately called the police to my neighbor's house, and I said I saw with my own eyes how a neighbor had just carried the corpse of his wife into the garage. Why so? Yes, because nobody transported living people in bags. This is the first obvious rule of any detective story. I don't know why, but the police believed me. And after about 15 minutes, I could admire how guys with machine guns handcuffed my neighbor. Then the same cops rummaged around the house. And finally, the same plastic bag appeared in my zone of visibility. And then I saw a crowd of policemen with machine guns, body armor, and other power attributes, laughing, clutching at their bellies. The neighbor was immediately let go. They apologized and went to the neighbors in search of the one who called them. Anyway, I wasn't going to hide, so when the cops knocked on the door, I immediately admitted, yes, I am the one with a responsible civil position. And in fact, why hadn't the neighbor been arrested? After this question, I felt terribly ashamed. It turned out that no one was trying to take our neighbor in a bag to the forest. In fact, just for 3 consecutive days, his wife was in the neighboring city with her elderly mother. Something bad happened to her, and her neighbor urgently moved out. And while she wasn't at home, a neighbor decided in his free time to do some useful household chores, to make repairs in the kitchen. Ironically, the kitchen and the bedroom are the 2 rooms that overlook the other side of the street with their windows, and weren't visible from my perspective. So the neighbor was quietly tinkering with repairs without my constant supervision. And then he decided to throw out scraps of wallpaper and other construction debris. But he came across Lisa, the vigilant falcon. And then the police, laughter, apologies, and a fine to my parents for a fake call. Yes, they accused me of reading books too much, and they wrote a fine to my parents. They would have written it to me, but I'm a minor, so forgive me, Mom and Dad. Of course, the penalties were instantly injected into my karma. My dad took my binoculars from me, and my mom forced me to learn all the laws of our state. I checked it personally, and there, by the way, is such a thick book. And they also took my expensive cell and tablet from me as a fine. Well, on the other hand, the desire to keep track of anyone was repulsed in some way. The neighbors, of course, found out about my hobby, and they started to condemn me in every possible way. Defiantly got curtains and definitely closed them in the evenings. Stopped discussing their important things in the yard and looked around in search of me. And when they saw me, they cursed and waved their hands. Since then, other people's windows have been a taboo for me. Having to satisfy curiosity through books and talking to friends is safe and risk-free, like a sudden fine. And probably it's even right, because if you put yourself in the place of my unfortunate victims, it turns out somehow uncomfortable. Like, what is it like to know that you are under round-the-clock supervision? Write in the comments if you've ever encountered stalking, or maybe you yourself watch your neighbors. Share the video with your spy friends, and remember that private life is called private, and outsiders are definitely not worth interfering in it.